My name is Kyle Chalmers. I graduated from St. Joe's in 2017. I had a double major in economics and business intelligence and analytics. And then I also had a minor in finance. As you might have heard, I'm originally from Arizona. The reason I came out to St. Joe's actually was because I'm a tennis player, and I was offered the opportunity to play on the tennis team. And then additionally, I really enjoyed the academic programs and just being in the city of Philadelphia. And so starting in 2013 when I was a freshman to literally a few days ago, I lived for about 10 years in Philadelphia, with the first 4 of those being school at St. Joe's. And then the next couple, I worked at PwC as an analytics consultant. And then after PwC, I joined an entrepreneurship fellowship called Venture for America, which got me connected with different startups in the Philadelphia area. And I ended up working for a Philadelphia startup as a data analytics manager. In the company was called Jernaya. And essentially what they did is they sold data as their product too. And after leaving that job, after 3.5 years of working there, I now am the senior manager of business intelligence at another startup called Happy Money. And so what Happy Money does is essentially we provide debt consolidation loans for people who are in credit card debt. And so imagine if you spent $10,000 on a credit card debt, and typically credit card debt has very high interest rates, right? Like over 20% a lot of the times. You can actually get a loan to consolidate, whatever debt you may have on separate credit cards into one loan at a lower interest rate. And our interest rates are typically under 18%. So we're typically cutting the consumer's interest rate by about 10% too. And so I help manage all the data and reporting for Happy Money. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool. Thank you. If when the students ask questions, if you can't hear, I'll repeat the question for them. I know that's been a little bit of an issue in the past. So can you kind of tell us more about your journey? You mentioned a bunch of jobs, but like, how did you know when to move on? Why? We've talked a lot in class about even trying stuff, internships that you realize maybe are not right for you. Like, can you talk about the journey of it?
So I had 2 internships during my time at St. Joe's, one between sophomore and junior year, and one between junior and senior year. So the sophomore and junior year one was an internship I knew just honestly going into it that wasn't going to be necessarily a long-term fit for me, whereas a healthcare auditing role. But it was really good experience just to kind of be able to understand how business works more in a corporate environment too, and understand particularly how data works too, and just how kind of the infrastructure of data is built within a business. And then the second internship I had was with PwC and ended up getting a full-time offer out of that second internship too. And so for me, I didn't necessarily have a clear idea of what I wanted to do coming out of college too. And so I was very open to different possibilities. And I think ultimately what ended up being the most important things for me when determining kind of the roles I've taken along my journey have been the culture of the company and the team that I'm working with, whether it seems like a positive culture with people who are collaborative and who will invest in my personal growth and development. And I think that's especially an important one coming out of college too, because really those initial positions with the investment that you have in your growth and development can help you set you up for steps later in your career too. And so that essentially kind of guided my progression, where it's like, all right, culture, growth and development to within PwC. And it led me to realize that I didn't necessarily want to work in analytics consulting long term. And for those of you who may not be familiar, because I know the word consulting is thrown out a ton, and people kind of assume that others know what it means. Think of consulting as essentially a company comes to you with a problem, and so for analytics, it's that they want to visualize a particular data or give you a bunch of different kind of data points that they have and say, hey, we have this question that we want to ask this particular data set. Can you answer it? And so that is kind of what consulting is. And after 2 years working there, I realized, all right, this maybe isn't necessarily for me. And I was really interested in entrepreneurship and startups. And so I came across the Venture for America and saw that it was a great way to get connected with startups in the Philadelphia area and really across the country. And so I was like, all right, this is more in line with my growth and development and what I envision my career path being in terms of helping out starting small businesses, working in small businesses, and eventually building my own small business as well too. And so I didn't necessarily know that, especially coming out of college too, but just through experimentation and keeping an open mind and finding places that that would put me in challenging positions where I had the opportunity to overcome adversity, solve difficult problems. That was kind of the ultimate conclusion where I landed on. I was like, oh wow, I really enjoy building things. I really enjoy solving difficult problems and working with great people. And so that has kind of been, I would say, the thematic course throughout my career thus far, which I've been working now for 5.5 years, I suppose, too. So really not that long, but it's been a good time. So 5 or 6 years. I know time flies.
If you all have questions as we go, like especially if they pertain to a certain answer, just let me know. Yeah, well,
Just kind of building directly off that, like would you be able to provide any examples of challenges that you faced like with smaller businesses? I'm kind of just interested in, because I imagine it's very different than if you're working with like a very large company, the sorts of challenges that a small business might face. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, of course. And I heard the question there, Scott. So you're good. So yeah, it's a really good question. Describing the differences between small and large businesses, especially startups, where I think yeah, I'll kind of contrast my experience in PwC versus the other places I've worked at too. And so when I got into PwC with the internship and starting out, right, I think one thing that large corporations do particularly well is they offer a lot of structure to new hires, to people who are new to the company, where they kind of have set paths. You have a really defined direction too, as far as if you're going in a specific team or group. They do invest a lot of resources in providing you the learning and development materials that you need, the kind of path how you can see your career grow within that institution. But it is kind of laid out for you, right? There are specific steps that oftentimes need to follow in order to meet kind of different levels, criteria for different levels. And so maybe contrasting that with startups, right? Startups can be a little bit more of an exponential curve in terms of your growth and development, I would say too, which I think for me, starting at PwC was great because having that structure and having those steps really kind of helped formulate me as a professional. But within startups, oftentimes you're just thrown into problems, right? Because they're a little bit more resource constrained, and they need people who are hired to jump in and immediately start working and start solving difficult problems. And so, for as an example, right, within the first startup I worked at called Jornaya, um, this was kind of coincidental, and coincidental things happen at startups where within the first 2 months of me joining, there were two other individuals that had familiarity with a piece of software that we use called Tableau. Are you guys familiar with Tableau, or have you heard of that before? Okay, I'm seeing some nods in the room, but just in case for those who aren't, basically a data visualization software where you put data in it and you make pretty graphs and reports. And so the two other people at the 60-person company I was working at who were familiar with Tableau left. And then I was the only person left with any familiarity of Tableau. And so then I was put in charge of it by default, right? And my familiarity wasn't really anything more than I had built some dashboards before. I'd worked with it in school. But because I had that, I essentially just had to jump in and figure out how to solve it. And there are some late nights in there too, where I was trying to figure out how to make this system sustainable and prevent it from failing too. But because of that adversity, right, and that little bit of stress that came with that, I was put in a position where I kind of jumped from an entry level position to a managing position. And within a year, I was managing my own team of analytics resources where we were building dashboards, figuring out how to organize data pipelines to get sustainable visual reports too. And so definitely a lot less structure with that too. But it offered a really, really great opportunity for me to kind of build upon that foundational skill set that I had within the structured environment in corporate and really see that accelerate within a smaller business environment too. So hopefully that gave you kind of a good example of comparing and contrasting the two.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
We got one in a row with some things. Yeah, we'll go 1 and 2.
Okay. Would you ever consider going back to a larger company like PwC?
Certainly, yeah. I think if the circumstances were right for me. Right now, I really enjoy my role. I really enjoy working at startups, but and I think I enjoy that environment, right? Where you kind of have a little bit more creative freedom to experiment and try different things and building teams too, where I think I really enjoy the management aspect of my work now too. But within corporate environments, they're always, especially for big companies, they're really, and I saw this a lot at my time at PwC, where they invested in this program called digital accelerators, right? Which is a very kind of corporate synergistic lingo way of just saying they wanted to invest in people who were familiar with technology and figure out how to implement technology and automation and everything that they do too. And so there are a lot of opportunities within bigger corporations where you can essentially create teams, create services, and build out whatever it is that you may be interested in too. And so if the circumstances were right where I could build something like that too, then yeah, I would certainly consider going back to it too. But I don't think I would necessarily want to go back to the same exact thing I was doing before, where I was just kind of working and consulting, right? But I think what I've invested my time in since PwC too would lend my skill set a lot better to building something like that within a big corporation. But yeah, I would 100% consider it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I was gonna ask,
Can you guys just introduce yourself, name, year, major, and what you might be interested in, if you don't.
yeah, I'm John. I'm a sophomore quantitative economics major with some like data science and like government minors. But I was curious, do you notice any you don't have to answer this for yourself, but more or less like in terms of your experience in the whole startup community, do you notice any financial risk that you take on, like personal financial risk by going to a startup versus a big corporation? Like it seems like for many of us, we're probably thinking it's kind of risky. You know what I mean? It's like you're putting it all out there. So I didn't know if you could speak to that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, John. And very apt, especially since we're especially within the technology finance industry, which I'm in fintech. It's a little bit more of a contractionary market right now too. And so I'll tell you a funny story. So I've been at Happy Money now a year. Within my first 2 weeks of joining Happy Money, they laid off 33% of their workforce. And then this past summer, we had to lay off another 15% of the workforce too. And so, yes, there is risk. There's certainly financial risk, stability risk. Things can be a little bit more chaotic in startups. But I suppose that I kind of like a little bit of chaos in my life. And it can be stressful at times. But I think I kind of said this before, but with adversity, right, always comes opportunity, right? And like, not saying that I would ever wish, and I wish the circumstances were different at Happy Money, right, where you don't ever want people to lose their jobs or have their careers affected in a negative way. But when that does happen, which it will happen inevitably over the course of your career, right? There are gaps and there are things that happen where you can really step up and see, all right, what are the jobs that are not getting done? Where are the roles, where we've let people go to, or things are missing that I can step in and help fill too. And so I think within that kind of, within that kind of perspective, right, you can really find ways to make yourself valuable to the business, and then also grow personally by and professionally just seeing, all right, how can I help other people who are still at the company? How can I step up and figure it out? But that said, like I 100% recognize the fact that I got really lucky. The fact that, because usually in layoffs, right, it's kind of last in, first out, and I was hired 2 weeks prior, but I was a backfill, thankfully, too, and not an expansionary hire, meaning that somebody had left and I came in and filled their old job too. And it was kind of a position that was needed within the company. So there is certainly risk, but I really do think it is worthwhile risk, especially from a learning and development and growth standpoint, right? Where I now have the perspective of kind of how my company has handled a contractionary market, how we've dealt with people leaving, how we've dealt with risk and adversity in this environment as a resource constrained startup, right? Where as in my previous startup, kind of everything was really rosy. We were like on a steady line upwards, and we were, cash flow positive. And we ended up getting acquired a year and a half into my time working at the business, and it's really cool to see that. And so now I'm kind of seeing the opposite side of startups, where, as exactly you said, there is risk too, but within my prior experience too, there's a massive amount of reward too, right? And so it's kind of, working at a startup, I would say, lowers your floor, but also raises your ceiling. Whereas a corporation kind of brings that, lowers your ceiling but raises your floor too.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Scott, I'm going to ask a little bit of a follow-up. You've mentioned so far the words culture, team. It sounds like your enjoyment of positions has become, if not more important, something that maybe you started to realize as you worked. And then along with John's question, like when you're younger, do you feel like you can take more risk, right? There's not, I mean, I don't know if you have a family and kids and like, as I think you move on in your career, you're not able to take on as much risk. So can you talk about making changes and what you were looking for at this point in your life, especially surrounding that culture, team, and enjoyment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I think, it's to give an answer, I honestly give a lot on a day-to-day basis with working is it depends. Depends upon your appetite for risk, what you think you need to be successful. I know for me, coming out of college and then working up to this point where right now I'm 28, so I'm still fairly young in my working career. I definitely do have a higher appetite for risk, I think, too, because I don't have children at this point, and I'm not married as well. I have bought a house, so I suppose I have that that I need to be concerned with. But that said, I think really if you're making a decision within your career and you think that, all right, I can really benefit from growth and development here too. Obviously, finances are an important part too. If you feel like you can grow financially too, and in startups, that may come with not just your salary, but equity options, benefits as well, 401k, health insurance, whatever it may be, and pay time off too. I think measuring all of those factors is really important and determining, all right, what do I want out of my career too, and what is what is something that is important to me? What are the things that are most important to me too? And I think one thing, like you're just I mean, I could be wrong, but you're probably not going to know that at this point in your life too. Just maybe some of you are working full time while also going to school. I'm not sure, but just accumulating that professional experience will really help you answer those questions as far as what you value within the workplace too, and what you like to do and the environment you like to work in. Because just it's one of those things, as you have different experiences, see how different workplaces operate, you start to formulate your own opinions and preferences as to how you want to grow, the environment in which you want to work in. And so like for me, not expecting perfection too, right? And having a few things that I really liked while also being realistic that, okay, maybe I have these 5 things that are really important to me, but this workplace meets 3 out of the 5, and the other ones meet 2 out of 5, or maybe something that's like 4 out of 5 too. Finding something that matches with your values while also keeping a realistic perspective that maybe not everything's gonna meet the things you want, and maybe that's a good thing too, because you might get a different experience and it might change your mind about what you actually thought you wanted too, because I know I certainly didn't expect to end up being in startups and enjoying entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial scene as much as I am right now too.
Thank you. Is there more questions? Does somebody else wanna? Okay, John, go for it.
I was gonna ask, do you notice any like drawbacks or perhaps like the opposite, where it's benefited you from like changing companies as frequent as you have? I feel like sometimes people might worry. I know people that have worried in the past about having like switching their jobs, especially, and it might be different earlier in your career, but do you notice any I guess issues with that when finding employment, or do you find like again the opposite where your experience from so many different companies actually benefits?
Yeah, no, it's a very valid question. I think for me, so I'm on my third company right now too. So I worked at PwC, Jernaya, and then Happy Money. And so PwC, I did about 2 years there. Jernaya, I did 3.5, and then now I think this week might actually be my 1 year anniversary at Happy Money. Where I think I've done enough time at each institution that I've been at, where that hasn't really been a question I've gotten, right? Where it's like, why did you only spend 2 years at PwC, or why did you, spend, 3.5 years at Janaya? I felt like 3.5 years was a good amount of time there too, especially seeing it from become a startup to being acquired. We actually acquired a company and then we went through a merger, so we got the trifecta there. And now with 1 year in at Happy Money, I think, I felt at every opportunity and every stop along the way too that I've had, which honestly hasn't been that many. I've been able to give it a really fair shot and invest a lot of myself in it too, right? To make it the best work experience possible. And so I think for me, my variety of experience has most certainly been a positive. And I would say especially making a jump from working in a corporate environment to going into a startup environment. Because the fellowship program I was in, or I'm an alumni of Venture for America, a lot of people actually join that straight out of college too. And I think having a little bit more work experience for me allowed me to kind of level my expectations, where I was like, all right, this is certainly not going to be very rigid structure, and going to have to take initiative with doing things too. Whereas other people who are maybe just coming out of college, maybe were looking for a little bit more structure than they were able to get out of the startups they're working at. So sometimes I know a lot of people who lasted, 6 months or even less than a year at the startups they're working at. So I would say leveraging my experience I had in the past has ultimately helped me, have a good, fruitful, productive, and valuable contribution at each place that I've stopped up, or I've been at along my career.
Yeah, Jordan,
So you mentioned that you played division.
introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm George Clifford. I'm a senior economics major. You mentioned that you played sports at a very high level. How, if in any way, how did sports kind of affect your mindset toward work and towards life? How did that kind of
Yeah, it's a great question, George. I think I don't know if you guys have ever watched the TED Talk by Angela Duckworth. It's about grit. It's one of the most famous kind of TED Talks out there. I'd highly recommend it. In case you have it, just look up Grit TED Talk. And it's really interesting. I forget how many minutes it is, but it's definitely less than 30. But to your question, I would say more than anything, George, playing tennis at St. Joe's taught me grit too, and kind of like being the person to take initiative and to solve problems is not easy and it requires effort and time. But it's really worth it for being able to provide value to the company that you're at and really see kind of your contributions help the larger team flourish, right? And so my experience playing tennis really, I think, helped prepare me in that aspect where I rely kind of on that competitive drive at times too, to continue pushing forward with the when confronted with a challenge or a difficult problem. And honestly, I've learned to enjoy it too. Because it's kind of like a different way to prove yourself, a different way to improve yourself. And I think also it's really shaped my mentality too, where I try to always embody a positive mentality and try to affect the environment around me by being positive and not let the environment that I'm surrounded in affect me, right? Whatever challenge that may be. And you'll find that if you're somebody who can go in and affect the environment around you and, be positive and, be a great person to work with, oftentimes you'll have success within that environment too.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Kyle, I want to ask a follow-up to that. So how, and especially if you can think about coming right out of school, how did you sell that, right? So you talked about grit, and it might not be tennis, right? We've got students who might be RAs or might have been a waiter or waitress or a camp counselor, whatever it might be, right? They have things that they've done that are not directly related to what they're going to be doing, yet there's skill sets that they need to sell. In your case, you talked about grit and the Senate and tennis. How did you go about making sure that an employer, knew that you could take those and package them in a way that's going to make you successful in the workplace?
Yeah, for sure. I think I got some really good career advice when I was an intern at PwC. And I think this applies to whatever job you're getting and you want to be successful at is to be brave, right? And so what I've taken that to mean is essentially whatever your job is, right? RA, waiter, waitress, work study, red shirt or anything that you might do on campus, right? Is not just necessarily following instructions, right? And following the letter law of the job, but really kind of going back to what I said earlier is looking for problems and being the person who can help solve them too, right? And the thing is, you don't have to have the answer for the problem that you're doing, and you don't have to be right. Even another piece of valuable advice that I got was I remember going into my first job and being like, oh, I have to be perfect. Like I can't make a mistake. Like that's ultimately going to affect like my valuation, and I don't want to like get a bad valuation or anything like that. And that like I think people who work in good cultures and good environments, and this is why I think this is an important point of it, understand that mistakes are a part of the learning and growing process too, and embracing them and saying, okay, I made a mistake. What did I learn from that, and how can I move forward, right? While being brave and going out on a limb and trying to solve a really difficult problem, I think will just really help you sell yourself within whatever company environment that you're in, and will help people recognize the value that you're providing to the business too. And so I think if you're in an interview environment, right, and you've been able to demonstrate in whatever capacity, in whatever job or activity, that you've done where it's like, hey, I'm a problem solver and I solved this problem, and then here was the impact of it, right? And I think that's a really kind of um, valuable marketing tool for yourself too, where employers, I think, and companies value people that they don't necessarily have to handhold. You can just give them a problem and be like, go figure this out too. And you can always go back for help too and have specific questions to other people too. But if you're able to just take something and run with it, that is so immensely valuable. I know for me, for the teams I manage to and the people I work with, I love working with people like that too. And it just makes it easy for me as a manager to advocate for this person. It's like they're, really taking on difficult problems and solving them and making a great impact. And I'll advocate for their promotions, for raises, for, whatever it is that they're shooting to develop within their career too.
Got roughly 10 minutes left. Do you all have more questions? Okay, I'm gonna ask one. Kyle, you mentioned as a manager, do you hire folks directly? Like, yeah.
I do. I
Okay.
do.
Okay.
When we're not laying off staff
Right,
members.
understood. Can you share in an interview, like, what's one of your favorite questions maybe to ask a candidate and why? I know I didn't prep you for this question, so
Yeah, no, it's a good one. For me, um, I think one of the um, um, best ways I like to evaluate candidates, and you guys might see this within job interviews that you have too, is just through an assessment too. I think that's the most fair way to evaluate candidates too, where you can give them a typical problem that they might work on within the job too, and then see how they assess it. And I'll, have them walk you through their thought process too. And so for me, that's my favorite part of every interview, and really a huge determining part, where I want to see, you know, if somebody has thought through the problem to why they took a particular direction, why they didn't take a particular direction within the problem. And so I think, you know, that I know that's a very particular answer to the question, Scott, but I think more and more companies are looking at assessments as a way to um, essentially judge candidates fairly. And I think the process of seeing somebody think through a problem and develop a solution, right, and present that too, can display a lot of skills to me too, and provides evidence for those skills, as opposed to just saying that, hey, I'm really creative. Like, that's great. I want to believe you, but I also want to see evidence for that, right? Too. And so I think coming up with stories for whatever um, or question you might be prompted with in interviews are very powerful too, because stories where it's like you lay out the situation, the task, the action, and then the result. There's a little acronym STAR questions, right? I think are the best ways to build up your evidence, right? Because that's essentially what you're doing within interviews, right? You're building up a body of evidence where me as a manager, I can say, all right, this person has displayed enough evidence to me that I'm confident that they could do this job and they could do this job well too, right?
I love what you just said. I mean, one, referencing the STAR format, which for behavioral based is spot on, is what we're hoping students do. But also, I know I get students who ask me when they get like a situation or an assessment type thing, is the is the employer looking for the right answer, or are they looking for my thought process? And hearing you, you really drove home that it is the thought process, and they want to see that. I think that's, very important.
Absolutely. And a little interview hack that I do too, especially since it's Zoom interviews, like just for example, right now on the left-hand side of my screen, Scott, I have all the questions you sent me prior to, and I jotted down some notes.
Yeah.
And then on the right side of my screen, I have the class, right? And so you can do the same thing in interviews, right? Where it's like, all right, maybe they'll ask me a question about a time I failed and how I reacted to that and what I did to resolve that failure. Then I'll just have a bullet point of like failure, and then be like a small little bullet that will remind me of a story, right? So there's especially little hacks that you can do with virtual interviews, and honestly even in-person interviews, where it might just have a notebook that have like little bullet points that will essentially just be little spark prompts for me too, that can help me go into a particular story that might demonstrate a particular aspect of myself.
Yeah, it's super solid advice on all fronts. So yeah, we got a question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Brandon Darby. I'm a junior here. I'm a double major in econ and finance. Just going off like an interview. Say you don't know how to answer a question. How do you look? I mean, what do you look for an interviewee to respond to something?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, honesty too. I think it's after doing enough interviews, right? You can kind of tell when and excuse the language, when somebody's bullshitting through an answer, right? And so I think just saying, oh, I don't know, I don't have experience with that. That's something I'd really, love to learn more about that. And if it's all right, let me ask you some questions about that too, or something, along the lines of that, where maybe there's something related to that too that you can, rely upon and use that. But like for me, I say I don't know all the time in my job, right? And that's like perfectly fine. You don't have to have the answer for everything, and that's not necessarily expected, right? And so I think just being a humble person in that aspect, right, and not trying to pretend that you have all the answers. For me, it's more valuable that person says that they don't know the answer, and so that way we can figure out, how we can, actually get the answer together, right?
And Brendan, I'm going to add to that because I like what Kyle said, but they might be giving you a question that they know 100% you can't come up with the answer for. So they might literally be trying to figure out if you have the ability to say, I'm not sure, how can we work through this, right? So if you get to that place and you don't know, and as Kyle said, you just start BSing it, they're going to know that, right? So don't go at that answer with just what you think they might want to hear. Go with what's really true for you. And if the job doesn't work out because of that, then the job wasn't meant to be, right? Because it's worse to get into a job that you don't want to be in than it is to, not get made the offer. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can focus on the lessons that you learned from that too. Maybe it's something you needed to know, right? And so then now for next time. And it may be a tough pill to swallow in the moment, right? But maybe for next time, all right, I need to know this, right? And you can take that as a learning, as a way to better yourself, right? And think about, okay, this is a piece of content I didn't know, and next time I get in an interview, I'll make sure that I know that, because it seems like it's an important aspect of these types of jobs that I'm applying to, right? And even talking about your approach of how you would familiarize yourself, right, with that particular skill or whatever it is that they're asking you about too, might be a good way to answer that question as well too, to show that you're willing and capable to invest that time in order to learn that skill.
Now we got like 2 minutes. Can you tell us what's one thing you wish you knew when you were sitting in their seats that you know now?
Yeah, I think, I've imparted upon you guys essentially kind of the big career advice that I've gotten, right? Where it's one, be brave, right? Don't be afraid to do things that especially other people aren't doing too. So like I've found some success in my career when, you know, other people have zigged and I have zagged, right? A little bit. And so don't be afraid to be brave and stand out and take initiative and be the problem solver within, your company, your future job, whatever you may be doing. Um, and it's okay to make mistakes too. When you make a mistake, um, you know, own up to it and say it's your bad and that, you've learned from it. And, essentially like it's a step upon your growth and development. Like I've deleted accidentally many things in companies that have been bad, and I've said, all right, that's my fault, my bad, guys. And so I remember just one last story where PwC, my very first project, uh the night before the deliverable was due for this consulting project, I accidentally deleted it all. And so it was extremely stressful. And so I told my manager and I said, hey, I deleted this, just letting you know. I'm gonna work to, try to rebuild it within this night. But I want to just be upfront with you about it too. And he was like, thank you for letting me know. Let me know how things go. And thankfully I was able to rebuild it in a night just because I built enough familiarity with the dashboard I had built too. But yeah, it's all good to make mistakes and don't be afraid to take initiative and go out of your way to solve problems too. People really appreciate that too, because ultimately you're just trying to help people, right? That's how I view my job. If I can help people, go out of my way to help people, then I'm helping the company.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and good luck with the rest of the move and settling back in Arizona.